Here's my grandpa's garden. No, not this nice green stuff, this brown shitty stuff. What could he have possibly done to screw it up this bad? And how can we turn it around? That and more in this episode of Soils in Sync. Westone here with Soils in Sync. Check out the full intro to the Soils in Sync infographic and soil health principles in the video I have linked in the description. Tickle that like button, subscribe, heck, it's free, and let us know your experience in the comments because we're all here just trying to learn together. Enjoy this tour. In this video, we're going to be looking at my grandpa's garden located in west central Minnesota, about here. It is on the edge of the Corn Belt, sort of where these three bioregions converge. He's definitely not in the northern Great Lakes forest. It is south of there in the Midwestern tallgrass prairie. If we just look in the background here, you can see the really nice, rich black soils in the surrounding cornfields. The garden is back here. He's got a lower garden and an upper garden, and he has gardened these for at least 10 years. And when this video was taken, the year prior, it was not a garden. It had gone fallow the year before. So this is spring of the following year after it had been fallow. So that's why you see all this tall, noxious, weedy thatch. I've said it before, but my grandpa was not a great gardener. He was a much better fisherman. And we're going to see kind of what 10 years of his management strategy did to the garden. And you can already tell it doesn't really look too good. It always kind of saddens me to see the wild areas around the garden to be greener and lusher than the garden itself. This is kind of tall grass prairie. Grass really likes to grow. Corn really likes to grow. The gardens are really hard to keep the grass out of. You can just see kind of how noxious and nasty that is. I did haul in some tree leaves, I think, the year prior, because I did try to just throw in a Hail Mary crop of potatoes. So I think there's some leaf mulch that you see in there, but that would have been the only time that ever happened, I think. Again, this is in the early spring. The ground is still wet. A lot of thistles coming up, a lot of dandelions come up. I have no idea what all these other tiny little weeds are. I've tried to dig a shovel into this soil in the middle of summer when it's dry, and it is the same as trying to dig into concrete. I was very surprised to find that my shovel went in easily, given that it was spring and it was wet, but that was normally not the case. Might have saw a nightcrawler there, couldn't tell. So if I had to sort of peg his garden at a carbon to nitrogen ratio, I don't know, it'd be under 15 to 1. 15 to 1 or less. And we're going to get to why that is. But I show this because I think this is what a lot of people deal with. Here's another look from up the hill. There's the lower garden. It's all brown and thatchy. Here's a better look at the upper garden. He does have a row of rhubarb here that is very productive. And I mean, just look at what rhubarb is. It's a giant, thick green leaf. That should tell you that it probably likes a high nitrogen, high nitrate environment. Rhubarb is in the Polygoniaceae family, so it does like a higher nitrogen environment. And the natural soils here are probably right about a 25 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. So not surprisingly, rhubarb does just naturally grow well here. Okay, so what was my grandpa doing in this garden to give me the heebie-jeebies in the way that it does? Okay, my grandpa would till 3 times a year probably. It seemed like every time he went out there, he was tilling because, you know, he's seeing all these weeds. He's got all this grass. What do? Well, you till. So this was like 3 times a year of tillage, okay? And that has the unfortunate effect of having a very, very highly disturbing effect, which sets your ecosystem backwards. Partially why it does that is because you're oxidizing the organic matter in the soil, specifically the carbon element. So you're oxygenating it and you're speeding its decomposition so that carbon kind of goes away. It probably turns to CO2 and just off gases and doesn't stay in your soil as useful organic matter. So the fact that he was tilling is partially why his garden was so disturbed and so weedy. The other thing he used to do is that he would get turkey manure to fertilize his garden, but if you're just feeding it raw turkey manure, poultry manure is very, very high in nitrogen. And that's aligning with that super, super weedy ecosystem. So because he was using too high a nitrogen fertilizer combined with too much tilling, he's setting his ecosystem way back here and making that carbon to nitrogen ratio very, very low. When the soil is out of sync with the crop's preference, crops will fail to thrive. The first soil health principle, keeping soil covered. My grandpa never used any mulch, very little if any. He never planted any cover crops. Any plant that tried to grow that wasn't a garden crop was instantly tilled, obliterated, or used some kind of herbicide. So the soil was constantly exposed. But luckily, the natural soils in this area are fairly rich, so they can take some abuse, and he definitely gave him some abuse. This garden is very much lacking in carbon. I don't necessarily think there's a shortage of nitrates or nitrogen, but it does seem to be lacking the carbon element due to over-tillage and due to just having a naturally low carbon to nitrogen soil. So a carbon mulch would really benefit this garden, probably slow down a lot of the weeds and thistles, and rebalance your soil back to that target of 30-1. So he greatly failed this soil health principle of keeping soil covered. The next soil health principle, minimize disturbance. Well, my grandpa basically maximized disturbance. He owned 4 tillers. He tilled at least 3 times a year, once in the spring, once in the fall, and probably once or twice in the middle of summer, and did that for 10 to 20 years. Well, why is he tilling so much? Why is he having to till so much? Well, if this is what you're dealing with, it's really easy to just say, I have to till. Remember, tilling is kind of a doom vortex. The more you till, the further you set your ecosystem backwards into a sort of weedy, grassy environment. Tilling your soil, something hard like this, appears to have some short-term benefits, but in the long run, you're destroying the soil structure that the biology has worked hard to build. Those roots will develop canals, those worms will develop channels. Fungi and carbon are what sort of decompact and help aerate that soil. Because we have over-tillage and excess nitrogen, we have basically no carbon and probably very little fungi in these soils. Next principle is increasing diversity. You can see all the diversity that this garden is trying to produce with thistles and all these various weeds, but he in no way added any sort of diverse cover crops or diverse mulches. He did not grow a wide variety of plants. So the diversity element could have also been improved. The fourth principle, use natural materials and reduce synthetics. As I said, he did not mulch very much, if any. It certainly wasn't a part of his routine if he did. And he was not opposed to using your standard variety of Miracle Grow or your various pesticides and herbicides. He's very much of that sort of synthetic, conventional mindset. The final principle, knowing your context. Again, my grandpa was not a great gardener. I don't think he necessarily put a lot of thought into his context. Keep in mind, we are in a natural tall grass prairie. That's its natural ecosystem. Like, this type of soil wants to grow grass. So having a garden in the middle of this type of vigorous pasture setting is difficult. The key is rule number 1, grow what wants to grow. Grass wants to grow here. So if you're going to have a farm, obviously you're going to want to grow some kind of pasture or some kind of domesticated grass like corn. That's why all the surrounding fields are corn. To have a garden in this can be a little bit difficult, but not impossible. Maybe this garden would be a good candidate to grow sweet corn. Grass wants to grow. Corn is a domesticated grass. If you do have to fight it, mulch is your best friend. If you can't mulch the entire garden, mulch around your plants. And I'm talking like deep mulch. So my action plan, if I were going to take over managing this garden, given my context, and of course this is going to completely depend on your context, for me, I can't be there to manage this garden. I live out of state, but I do get there a few times throughout the summer. So what I would do is first stop tilling. Second, I would call some lawn care guys, and I know there's a lot of them in this area. I would get them to start dropping off leaves and grass to this site and just have them kind of spread it out over the garden bed. I would maybe just have them do that for a year or two to rebuild that organic matter. Especially in the fall, these guys get a lot of tree leaves, which would go real good in this garden, which is deficient in carbon. Okay, so after a year or two of very heavy mulching, getting as much organic matter out here as I can, if I needed to get a food crop out of it, given that I can't be there and nobody can be there to manage it, I may just grow a Hail Mary sweet corn crop. Since there are really no pests, I don't normally grow sweet corn because all kinds of raccoons or deer or something is always there at exactly the right time to steal it from me. In this garden, there's never been a fence, never needed to be a fence. No real wildlife issues in this particular area. So that's probably what I would do in this situation. One other thing my family and I had considered doing out here after my grandpa quit gardening was just to plant some raspberries and just kind of let them go wild and just stop by once in a while during the season to harvest. That still could be a viable plan, but given that raspberries like a 70-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio and his garden soil is probably less than 15-to-1, there's a pretty wide discrepancy there. So raspberries would require a straw or tree leaf mulch, maybe even a wood chip mulch given the extreme carbon deficiency. But lots of things are possible here, but no matter what the plan, the right mulch is going to be required to feed these soils that have been starved for years. Another critical piece to the action plan is to implement pathways. You want to have separate garden beds and pathways so that you're not always walking on your precious decompacted soil once you do get that loose aerated soil structure built. This image here is from one of my gardens. You can see this pathway, which is just wide enough to walk on. The plants are even starting to kind of grow over the pathways, which is okay. I want to capture as much solar energy as possible. I don't want big, wide, unnecessary pathways that don't grow any greenery. So Grandpa's garden could also benefit for some pathways. The other thing I would do in my Grandpa's garden is just radically downsize it and focus on a more high-intensity planting. He's got way too much wasted space. His garden was never planted this dense. So his garden beds were kind of the inverse of mine. He'd have an occasional row of crops and then have to fight weeds over this entire space. So that just didn't make a lot of sense. And that would be another strategy for this garden, is just to downsize it and focus on a more intense planting. So in conclusion, I think this garden makes a really good example for people, because I think this is what a lot of gardeners deal with, and this is what a lot of maybe some of the older conventional mentality produces. Excess nitrogen and over-tillage both contribute to organic matter burnout or carbon burnout. You can see what 10 years of kind of doing it wrong does to your garden. It leaves your garden worse, not better. Check out the video I did on Paul Gauchi's garden, and you can see what doing it right for 10 plus years does to your soil. If this video helped grow your soils, you can help grow the channel by liking, subscribing, and commenting. If not, add a dislike, but at least tell me why. West Tone here, once again happy to keep them soils in sync.